Hey, Todd Hampson here, and I've really been looking forward to shooting this short video. It's one, I'm not going to cite a bunch of scripture, but I'm going to talk a little bit more in general terms. And here's why. We're answering the question, are we really closer to the rapture than ever before? If you've seen a lot of videos of late or seen ministries like mine where we talk about Bible prophecy, some people sensationalize it, some people pick dates, others, like what I try to do and people that I team up with, like Jeff Kinley and others and people we have on our podcast, we try to stick to scripture. But it still begs the question, are we really closer to the rapture than ever before? Or if we had a tagline for this short video, it would be, how is today any different? How's today any different than in the 70s when they really felt like the Lord was going to return soon, or the 90s when the doctrine of the rapture was popularized more broadly through the Left Behind series, or first century churches, or any other time in church history? What makes today different than any other time in church history? And that's an important question, and it's one that I get every once in a while, and it's a valid question because, like I said, there is so much sensationalism. There's two extremes. There's either scoffing that the rapture is not even in the Bible, which I don't even know how they argue that because it's so clearly in Scripture. You can't read First Thessalonians 4 without seeing a play-by-play detailed description of the rapture, and many other passages as well. But also just an attack on the pre-trib rapture, meaning that the rapture could happen at any moment. So here's the answer. First, so the answer is really yes and no. Yes, we are closer than ever before to the rapture, just chronologically, but we'll unpack some other reasons as well. And how is today any different? In some senses, no, it's not any different. Meaning the rapture has always been an imminent event, or an event that could happen at any time. There are no preconditions or anything that has to happen before the rapture. That's why Paul said in the first century, describing the rapture in 1 Thess 4, then we who are alive will be caught up together with them. He thought his generation would see the rapture. So his generation lived with that expectancy that the rapture could happen at any moment. They greeted and said goodbye to each other with the word Maranatha, which means, O Lord, come, meaning they were always ready for the Lord's return. And that's a healthy way to live. It purifies our life. It helps us to live with joy and expectancy, even in tough times. But it's not just a bait and switch or a psychological exercise. We literally don't know the day or the hour, and there's no preconditions, so the Lord could return at any moment via the rapture. So in one sense, that's a healthy tension to have that. But then in our generation, and here's really the question that people are asking when they say, is today any different than any other time, is how do we know biblically that we're closer to the rapture? Of course, we know chronologically. 2,000 years have gone by. John said, little children, today, this is the last hour, he said in the first century. So chronologically, we're closer than ever to the rapture. But more significantly, or just as significantly, is the fact that, number one, Israel is in the land again. This is the flashing neon sign that doesn't put a timestamp on it, but it just means that God is readying the world for all the end time events. Everything we read about in the book of Revelation or the Olivet Discourse, all the judgments of Revelation, the Antichrist coming to rise and all coming to power, all that stuff is a prerequisite for that, is that Israel must be in the land again in unbelief, in control of Jerusalem, with a desire to rebuild the temple. That's exactly where we are. So Israel becoming a nation again, by the way, that was prophesied by every Old Testament prophet except for Jonah in some way, shape, or form. Some of it relates to the future millennial kingdom, but many of those, particularly Ezekiel and some stuff in Jeremiah and Isaiah, even hints that, or even outright shows that they will be gathered in unbelief before the future end time events, before the millennial kingdom. So anyway, Israel in the nation again is a flashing neon sign. There's so many other tributaries connected to that. The land springing back to the life, that's a fulfillment of prophecy. The people constantly the Jewish people having a desire, like a homing beacon, to go back home to Israel. That's a fulfillment of prophecy that's in process. The anti-Semitism that's rising around the world, that's an in-process prophecy. But what I mean by that is, just to clarify, is that's not a completed fulfillment of prophecy. But what we find is, in the future tribulation period, the whole world will be against Israel, and the majority, if not all, of Jewish people will be in Israel. So we're seeing that being in process, that prophecy being in process before our eyes. Again, by the time of the 7-year tribulation, those have to be fully in place. So, as I often say, prophecy doesn't happen in a vacuum. It takes time. It takes certain conditions to happen. So Israel's a flashing neon sign. I call that, look at that as one major bookend: Israel and the land and all the things related to that. Then when you study Scripture, you look at all these other things, like what society is like, the lawlessness, the scoffing, the brutal times that Paul talked about in 2 Timothy, the doctrines of demons, many churches wanting to set up pastors who just tickle the ears of people. They don't really preach truth anymore. It's watered down. It's what people want to hear to get them in the door, so to speak. And again, that's not every church, but that's many churches in our day are like that. It's a common thing that's in our day. What else? The alignment, the geopolitical alignment for the Ezekiel 38 war, which I believe happens at the beginning of the tribulation, or just before that, or around the time of the signing of the peace treaty between Antichrist and Israel, or possibly in that second seal judgment where war breaks loose, somewhere around there. Anyway, the conditions for that are in place. Iran, Turkey, and Russia, the three main players in that, are in an alliance, just like it says in Scripture, for the first time in history. So I could go through many other geopolitical alignments, many other cultural phenomena, all kinds of stuff that we read about in Scripture. And what we call that is convergence. So not only do you have, if you look at it as two bookends, you have Israel and the land on one end, then you have all these other categories. And then on the other end of the books, the bookend is convergence, that all these things are converging in our day. Now, two things. One, that doesn't tell us that it's absolutely tomorrow or next week or this year or this decade, but it tells us that God is preparing the world for the last act. So we need to live like the Lord could return today, but plan like he's not returning in our lifetime. It's a healthy tension that every generation of believers should live with. But I believe we have more reason than any other generation in history to believe that the Lord could return in our generation. So that's exciting. Think of it like this. Imagine somebody gives you a novel and you're reading this novel, and in the opening couple chapters, it sets the setting for the novel. And the way it's described, you're like, oh, that sounds like my neighborhood. That sounds just like the blue house on the corner that it's described there. Oh, wow, that's the same name as the street over there. There's a park across the street. Oh, that sounds just like, again, another detail in my neighborhood. Then you start reading a little further, and you just find more and more details that sounds like even the same time frame. Sounds like it's when I'm living in this house on this street with that name is when these things are beginning to take place. So the more you read that novel and the more you see the setting looks like your neighborhood, the more compelling it is and the more it gets your attention, till at some point you just can't deny, okay, this is a novel about my time period and about my neighborhood. Now, the novel may not give you an exact date or an exact time, but it's clear from the clothes that are worn, from the cars that are driven, the different things like that give you a general time stamp that lets you know the rough time frame. So the way some people who study Bible prophecy put it is, we don't know the day or the hour, but it really looks like we're in the season of the Lord's return more than any other generation in history. And you can study church history to see what they believed at different times. And really, they didn't have a lot of clarity. The first century had some clarity. They believed in the imminency of the rapture, that it could happen at any moment. They believed in a literal 1,000-year reign of Christ. They were called Chiliasts, which was the Greek word for 1,000. And then, throughout church history, for various reasons, this would be a whole nother series of videos about why each era kind of got it wrong with eschatology, or things got fuzzy or muddy or allegorized. But after the Reformation, when we returned to reading scripture for ourselves, and as Bibles proliferated and got translated into key languages that people could read it for themselves, all of a sudden the church started to see again, okay, the rapture could happen at any moment, and there's a future literal return of Israel to the land. And that was kind of scoffed at, even leading up to 1948. I have a book over here on the shelf called God and the Jew. I grabbed a copy. It was published in 1946. And the thrust of the book is summed up in one of the chapters that says, there will never be a national restoration of the Jews. And then 2 years later, there was a national restoration of the Jews. In other words, case study, you can take the Bible at face value. You can take prophecies literally. They say what they mean and mean what they say. If you study them in that context and you look at the novel, you suddenly start to say, you know what, this novel looks a lot like my neighborhood. This novel looks like a lot like my time frame. So that's what it is. It's not something where you'd be adamant about, and we need to steer clear of date setting or pointing to some sensational reason why we think, like a dream somebody had or something goofy like that. God gave all of his revelation in the 66 books of the Bible. That's where we get our answer, not because somebody said they had a dream or a vision that the Lord's returning next week or something like that. Stick to Scripture. You'll never go wrong. Let Scripture speak for itself. You'll never go wrong. Take it at face value. Believe that all of the future prophecies, just like the 80% of fulfilled prophecies, will be fulfilled literally just like all the old ones, all the previous fulfilled prophecies were. So hopefully that helps a little bit, clears up a few things, and helps give you an idea of why we think that we're closer to the rapture than ever before, and that our generation is different than any other generation, the things we're seeing in the world. But again, don't sensationalize it. Don't get ahead of the Lord with it. Just trust him with the timing, but know that there's more reason now to believe that his return could be soon, and that should excite us, and it should make us want to reach people for Christ, teach people the Bible, and be the salt and light of the world, and occupy until he comes, just like he commanded. Hope this has encouraged you. Please share it with somebody who you think needs to hear it, and I'll talk to you again next time. Take care.